Hi, my name's Mark Collier, and if you've clicked on this video, it means you two have been watching the debate online about free will, and especially the two biggest critics of it, Sam Harris and Alex O'Connor, which have decided that free will is an illusion and doesn't exist. And for the point of their arguments that I understand, I agree with them. But there is always a part of it that I feel they're missing or are somehow blinded to because of their perspective. Now, I'm not a Stanford trained neuroscientist, nor am I an Oxford trained with a doctorate in theology in terms of the logic, but I have completed a master's in music. That's my background, and in education. And so perhaps that's my perspective as a creative, that understanding that there is a definition of free will that I believe proves that it exists. And here's my argument is that any creative, and I would say musicians, painters, writers, have discussed for centuries that there is this process by where the creative process gets wedded to a subconscious process, that at some point in time, their technique, passion, place in life unites with a subconscious and a creative work passes through them. Stravinsky talked about the rite of spring, saying that I am the vehicle through which the rite of spring passed. And Mahler talked about, giving birth to the symphonies that he had done. And there are many, many stories of improvising musicians that discuss the idea of that at some point where there's this fusion of your experience and technique, which is practice developed over years, decades, that at some point your subconscious and your conscious ability is united by years of will, years of choices made over a long period of time. And it's especially Harris's argument that will doesn't exist or is an illusion that I think really strikes me as ironic, because to me, one of the core definitions of will would be meditation. And he is a far greater expert on that than I. I have practiced meditation for better part of 25 years, but at no level like Harris. But to me, his description of it, of becoming aware of the dialogue between those thoughts that appear in your head and controlling them, and or seeing that they are not your responsibility or being generated by you, is true. But I believe that within the creative world, especially, that if you write, compose anything, that at some point you understand that our self, and that includes the subconscious and the conscious, the dream world and this world, but our inner self that generates those thoughts, whether it be the yin and yang or the two wolves that you feed, all of these metaphors come from many cultures, but describe the fact that we recognize as humans the experience that those thoughts and inspirations and ideas come to us, and our ability to act or not act, to react to them, is what I believe is the colloquial general definition of will. That may not be to a neuroscientist who understands that those neurons have already fired and those ideas have already been processed before that human knows that milliseconds later their arms or mouth or something is going to move. We understand that as a differentiation between a scientific definition of will and maybe an everyday, colloquial, general definition of will, that those two things are different. And I think that Harris's concession that he makes allowances for effort, right? So he understands that effort plays a part in that. And also his warning of not to say this to your children. Don't tell them this because they'll turn into these monsters. And I would certainly agree. But maybe that's my experience in education as both a teacher and a student. And that we understand that, and by we as a culture understand that through proper parenting, proper education, and what we would consider a healthy environment, that person's ability to make choices that are part of their will from that dialogue between their subconscious dreaming and their outward efforts right there is an example of will, of how we can empower ourselves internally and as a society to make choices, to change from previous patterns and go forward. I believe any concept of progress or even cultural evolution would include that concept and is not revolutionary. So this is where I've come down to what will is, at least the way that I see it. And I know that having spoken to many creatives especially, that there is a lifelong pursuit which is similar to meditation, on where we will get to that choice of getting rid of what we don't need and taking on the abilities that we do to get in touch with whatever that voice is that is our yin and yang. And that's my concept of will. And I'm curious of what you think of just that take on it. So again, this is not necessarily a dismissal of what Harris and O'Connor think of it, but I think they're missing this for a point. And I think it's significant that both of them have mentioned that they lack an appreciation of music. Like, if left to their own devices, O'Connor specifically has said, just wouldn't listen to it and hasn't developed an appreciation for it. And Harris has discussed this, that he knows other people are getting some sort of communication and appreciation for it that he's not. And it's interesting that both of them have made that point. And I, as a musician, that understand that this duality of ourselves and the negotiation of that and narrowing, or maybe I should say winnowing of that over a lifetime to get to our true selves, which is another concept, or doing away with old habits or bad habits, if it's a psychology or self-examination. Maybe will is the effort over long periods of time of bringing those two halves together into the real choices that you make. So I'd be interested in what you hear of that or think of that, and hear from you. And I appreciate you listening.